Hello again, I am Blunty. This is the XFX RX 5600 XT. Is that enough X's for you? But I'm not done yet because they also call it the Thick with two C's 2 Pro. It is my favorite RX 5600 XT I've ever laid hands on. Of course, it is the only 5600 XT I've ever laid hands on, mostly owing to the fact that these are brand spanking new. Now, AMD's RX 5600 XT is designed as their ultimate in 1080p gaming, and that's how they're marketing it. And that's who they're trying to sell it to, and that's how they've priced it. So that's how I'm going to review it. But I can't decide if I love or hate that XFX call this version of the thing thick with two C's. On the one hand, the double C thick is already so cringy a phrase it's long past its 15 nanoseconds of being trendy. On the other hand, as you can see, it's actually rather slim and elegant compared to some chunky GPU coolers that may have suited the name better, and I do like a bit of irony. But in fact, it is easily the nicest looking thing I've seen from XFX. Usually, their coolers have, they're kind of cheap and plasticky and ugly looking, if I'm perfectly honest with you, although they've performed quite nicely. In any case, the 5600 XT Thick 2 Pro has boosted clocks over stock for the 5600 XT, and it has the full complement of 6GB of GDDR6 VRAM. There's lots of other numbers, shading units, compute units, texture rates, memory bandwidth, and of course, every uninformed noob's favorite number, the teraflop. That's 7.465 teraflops for the FP32 flavor, just in case you're curious and want to make comparisons without understanding what all the other factors that make it a dumb idea are. But that's not how we roll here. I don't care about numbers on a page. Under my roof, we don't obsess over them. We don't slap up boring-ass charts and bar graphs to draw conclusions from. We just play some friggin' games on it and see if the game runs fast enough with all the pretty stuff turned on for it to be pretty and for it to be fun to play at the same time without the distractions of poor frame rates or having to turn stuff off. To that end, and in line with AMD's claim that this card will be everything you need to make sure you can run your games at 1080p with all the settings and graphics options all ramped up to the very best, I put it up against three highly popular choices, and cards which I myself have recommended for easy mode, top tier, 1080p, worry-free gaming, and a couple I like for 1440p gaming, but we'll circle back to that by the end. I've got the GTX 2060 in there, which is also representative of the 1660 Ti when you take the ray tracing cores out of the picture. There's the GTX 1080, a true brutal workhorse of a card and one which I still use myself in my second rig to this very day for 1080p and 1440p gaming. And on the Team Red side, the RX 5700. And in relation to that card, I got an email from AMD the day before this review goes up, and they were rather adamant that the Radeon RX 5600 XT was, and I quote here, specifically designed and optimized to deliver the best 1080p gaming experience, while the Radeon RX 5700, with its additional memory and memory bandwidth, was specifically designed for 1440p gaming. See, that seemed to have been fielding some questions about if the RX 5600 XT would simply be replacing the Radeon RX 5700 on shelves, but no, they see a division. They draw a line in the sand and they tell me the 5700 is selling really quite well. And as you can see at 1080p, the 5700 has an edge, but not much of one. So clearly, if you're happy at 1080p, and if you're looking for an AMD card, you can save a noticeable amount of cash by going for this new beastie. And the same is true of the other cards, even the 2060, and while they'd have an edge past 1080p for AMD's stated market, the RX 5600 XT seems like it nails it at 1080. But of course, some games favour some architectures more strongly than others, like for example, the Outer Worlds. Team Green kick ass here by a much wider margin than Dauntless had versus both Team Reds. However, it'd be smart to keep in mind that many, if not the vast majority of gamers sticking with 1080p are more than likely to also have a similarly budget-friendly monitor, and that pretty much guarantees it's going to be at 60Hz refresh rate. And while some games, like esports types, can have latency benefits from high frame rates despite being actually played on a 60Hz screen so you don't even see those high frame rates, this game is not one of them. And the 5600 still keeps that 60 FPS feed even with every last setting maxed out, so I'm calling it a passing mark. In Fortnite, and yes, as a grown-up, I still lament having to actually install and play this game when I do GP reviews. I Kind of hate it actually, but it's a very relevant game for this card, so here we are. And we're also back on level footing compared with the other bigger price tag cards. The game happily sits in the 80s and 90s, where I consider it the most playable from a snap reaction point of view. Back onto a good game, though, he said, baiting all the angry 8-year-olds about to ask Mummy for an RX 5600 XT for their birthday. Borderlands 3. It too, on its so-called badass settings, is easily handled. So easily, it occasionally pops into the triple digits, which is a surprise. In fact, it's only the GTX 1080 that starts to lag behind here, and I suspect in this game that may have something to do with the memory speed and bandwidth of the older cards starting to hold it back. But by this point in the picture, it's becoming clear. While the 5600 XT predictably lags behind the 2060 and 5700, the gap between them is far narrower than I'd expected. The 5600 XT was never designed to be a GPU that blows you away. It was built down to a price point and with no grander aspirations than to just do fully realized 1080p without compromise on settings or frame rate. And it delivers above that. I'd expected games like this, at their fattest, chunkiest settings, to do a nice 60 FPS, but little more. I was wrong. It's better. Much better. And better is better because that also means as games keep getting more and more demanding over the next couple of years, this card will still remain a good investment capable of handling them. The next test is an odd one. Minecraft. Java version and with an enhanced texture pack and also the ray tracing shader. This is not, by the way, the NVIDIA one that is not out yet. It only works with RTX cards and it only works on the Windows 10 version of Minecraft. This ray tracing shader, the PTGI, doesn't need or even use ray tracing cores on GPUs. It's all regular computation, just like any other shader. But the PTGI ray tracing shader is also known to be quite a bit less efficient on AMD hardware than NVIDIA. So this was more just out of curiosity than anything else to see how big a gap it is. And indeed, it's the difference between playable and not playable. So take that for what it is. The Witcher 3, despite it being an aging game now, is seeing a significant resurgence in players recently since the TV series reminded people that it exists and is regarded by many as superb. So it becomes relevant again for benchmarking. It's a game well known for being a bit of a brute to run at its fanciest, but again, it provides more proof that AMD are delivering remarkably well with the 5600 XT. At frame rates approaching triple digits, there is a, for all practical purposes, completely negligible difference in the performance compared to the other cards. Frankly, with the somewhat sloppy controls this game has, it's pointless above 60 FPS anyway, you won't feel the difference. But hey, overhead is always nice. Another return from benchmarking's past, Monster Hunter World, a recent large expansion, has refreshed the player base on this one, and is another visually complex game. It's always made for a nice benchmark test too. The two green cards have a larger edge in this one again, but once more, the type of gameplay on offer doesn't actually benefit from reaching more than 60 FPS. So as with our last example, the smart way to play would be to enable one of the frame sync options and cap it out at the 60 Hz of the display you're probably using anyway. The card will then run cooler, quieter, uses less juice, while the game keeps running flawlessly. Everyone's a winner. On that note, back to this specific example of the card, I'd recommend it. The cooler is nice and efficient, far quieter than I'm used to seeing from XFX cards. In fact, its noise level was on par with the likes of Asus, Gigabyte, and MSI, all of whom I have liked for years for their attention to keeping things quiet on the cards. Nice work, XFX. Put this cooler design on all your cards from now on. This particular card also comes with a small out-of-box overclock, and while I've kind of moved away from the simple canned benchmark tools lately, it's still useful for an objective measurement of an overclock. So, out-of-box, Firestrike pings at 6800. Very respectable. Doing nothing more than using AMD's automatic overclocking tool in the Radeon software slaps the 1235 MHz base clock up to 1690 MHz with a single mouse click. It's ridiculously easy. And all of a sudden, that 6800 score zerps all the way up to 7403. And without getting any noisier, by the way, it's still basically whisper quiet. So that's real nice. And with this seamless overclock in place, I decided to see about that 1440p stuff. Dauntless in 1080p got up to about 150-ish here, and in 1440p we still maintain consistently above 100 FPS. And this is one of those games where the extra snappy feel you get from higher frame rates, even on a standard 60Hz display, is absolutely worth it. So it's nice to see the 5600 XT handle this with ease. The Outer Worlds, though, when pushed to maxed out 1440p, comes closer to not being worth it. Sure, you're still better off visually and performance-wise than your average console player, and frankly, the shooting in this game isn't the prime draw or even its best feature, but I like it best at a nice locked 60 FPS rather than the fluttery 40s that it does here at 1440p, so B+. Borderlands 3, same boat. It gets a respectable 40-something FPS average, but this is absolutely a game that feels noticeably better at 60 FPS or better. Playable at 1440p? Yeah, no problem. Ideal? Call it C+. The Witcher 3, though, no complaints. While it flutters into the mid-50s from time to time, once again, it's a game that isn't strongly affected by that, so I'm calling it happily playable at 1440p. And Monster Hunter World? Well, somewhere in between the last few. It's a bit more variable, but for the most part it hits in the 60 ballpark consistently enough to call this another 1440p win. So, the walkaway story. AMD nailed it with their target of high-octane, full-fat 1080p with enough overhead to leave you with confidence that the card will remain viable at this level for a fistful of years. And depending on your gaming tastes, even 1440p can be pretty practical, but that's not why I'd recommend it. So I find myself falling in line with AMD's marketing tag. This thing really is a fantastic choice for 1080p gaming. Solid card, solid performance, very compelling price. I can find no reason not to happily recommend the 5600 XT. It's a very good card that delivers exactly what the marketing claims it would deliver. Nice work, AMD. Nice work, XFS, on this specific example. And you can say nice work, Blunty, in the down below area, please. Thank you for watching. I am Blunty. I appreciate any subscribes and bells and comments, etc., etc., etc. And I will catch you next time.